Ros.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Concern, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to present to you today on the humanitarian impact of the Syrian crisis and for taking the time to focus on this critical issue. We in Concern recognise that almost all of the recent discussion on Syria has been about chemical weapons use and what to do about this, along with the threat of international military intervention. This is distracting from the humanitarian situation, and we welcome the opportunity to highlight the plight of the Syrian people and bring greater focus to humanitarian needs inside Syria and in neighbouring countries. This is a highly charged, highly complex, highly politicised and hugely complicated context, and for humanitarian agencies working on the ground in the country, like ourselves, we are having to feel our way through this in a very slow, considered and measured way in order to overcome the issues related to sustained access, building acceptance of our presence and programmes, and very, very high levels of insecurity. Concern is working in both Syria and Lebanon in response to the crisis, providing shelter and WASH, which is water and sanitation assistance, to refugees in northern Lebanon, and the primary focus of our current work inside Syria is to provide a broad WASH programme to reach people at risk of disease. I've recently returned from a month in the region and have seen firsthand the impact that this conflict is having on the Syrian population. In Lebanon, the number of refugees is heading for the 1 million mark in a country with a similar population to Ireland, but only a fraction of its size. Can you imagine what it would be like for 1 million people to come here out of desperation and need? This is leading to increasing tensions between Syrian refugees and Lebanese hosting communities because of the pressures that the increased population is placing on available housing options there. The lack of suitable shelter options has reached crisis point in Lebanon, with more new arrivals and increasing incidents of evictions of those who are there already. Increased incidents of cross-border shelling into North Lebanon is putting both Lebanese and refugee families at increased risk. While obviously indiscriminate in who it affects, the shelling appears to be targeted in areas of high displacement and is happening far too often to be considered accidental and stray. This is impeding access to affected populations. On September 13th, 6 bombs fell around the small village of Freitas, barely a mile from the Syrian border, and its former school, which is now home to 10 Syrian families. This is Freitas Collective Centre in northern Lebanon. After the attack, the 10 families living in Freitas were asked to leave. Those living in the old school building are being located to another collective centre away from the border. We do not feel safe anymore, Josiane says. We hate it when night comes because of the shells. Because of the shelling, the host communities say that the refugees are a target and they would like them to leave. We are also afraid of something else. The people in the village came by a couple of times to tell us to leave. They don't want Syrian people in their village, and they are saying that it's because of our stay that the shells are being thrown at them. Inside Syria itself, the indiscriminate nature of the conflict and the climate of fear that exists after nearly 3 years of fighting, the fear of aerial bombardment, the fear of car bombings, the fear of being lifted from your home at night by one group or another, has led to mass exodus and almost total economic ruin of the country. This has resulted in over 10% of the population fleeing the country and becoming refugees in neighbouring countries, current estimates of 2.1 million refugees, and more than double that taking to the road and becoming internally displaced inside Syria, currently estimated of roughly 4.5 million IDPs. In another case study, Ibrahim and Noor, a brother and sister. We don't know if we'll be alive from one day to the next, or whether I will be kidnapped or arrested. The most important thing for me is to feel safe. This fear is not just my fear, but also a fear for everyone living in Syria. No one knows if there will be shelling or bombing. It's complicated. There is no sense of security, no matter where you go. My sister and I have moved 3 times in the last year, and finally we just had to leave Syria. This is a brother and sister who have recently arrived at a refugee camp in Turkey. Syrians are finding it increasingly difficult to safely feed and house their families. Another case study, Fatima, a mother, and Ahmed, her cousin. Life is very difficult here. My husband had a good job but now sells cigarettes on the roadside. I work at a border kitchen. They give me breakfast, lunch and dinner for my family. Another woman minds my children and baby while I work. We also get 1.5 loaves of bread a day from a local NGO. We're grateful for this, but this is not enough. And if we don't get the supplement food from the kitchen I work in, we couldn't survive. Much of the infrastructure is either destroyed or damaged and not functioning or even at a minimum level. I refer to industry, electricity, water, healthcare, education as a result of the conflict, and much of this is concentrated in the cities and towns, areas that have borne the brunt of sustained bombardment for over 2 years. The situation is deteriorating daily, and winter is coming for the 3rd time since the conflict began, which is bringing additional hardship due to fewer means for coping at the disposal of people. In many parts of the country, people are not getting paid and the fabric of society is breaking down. Yet many of these people are still showing up for work and trying to work with fewer and fewer resources in an infrastructure that is barely functioning. What is normal inside Syria today is barely tolerable for the people. We have seen a doubling of the number of refugees since January this year, and there is every reason to believe that their numbers will double again if the situation remains unresolved. For the huge displaced population inside Syria, conditions are appalling. The UN have described the situation in Syria as the greatest crisis of the last 30 years, and it will take years, if not decades, to recover from when the conflict is finally brought to an end. It is drawing in neighbouring countries and poses a very real danger of escalating beyond Syria into a much broader regional conflict. So where to next? Much more intensive efforts are needed to find a durable political and diplomatic end to the conflict. We welcome the efforts of Antónis and his engagement with the UN on this issue and hope that all pressure can be brought to bear to ensure that the Geneva II talks go ahead as scheduled at the end of November. They must be inclusive and bring all parties and all influences together. Having just some of the multitude of movements and groups represented will not in itself bring about an end to the hostilities. The neighbouring countries affected by the crisis also need to be represented and involved, including Israel and Iran. The $4.5 billion US dollar appeal for Syria is only 50% funded to date, and more resources have to be made available in order to provide timely and appropriate humanitarian assistance, both inside Syria and in the neighbouring countries. I've highlighted some of the issues facing refugees in Lebanon, and there is an additional need to lobby with the Lebanese government to rethink its objections to large-scale formal camps, as other options are fully saturated and currently exhausted. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.